From time to time, I do read comments suggesting that film-to-game tie-ins were fairly bad in general, but here we are with another edition of the best movie-to-game tie-ins, marking this video in the series as Part 4, or IV for Roman numerals as you'll see from the thumbnail, you know, to give it that whole cinematic vibe, which is of course the entire point of these videos. Part 4 has gone deeper into the world of movie tie-ins and most definitely includes several games that you might not expect to see, or you might have likely just totally forgotten about the brilliance of some of them as the years have passed us all by. Admittedly, during my research I often look at the release years of some of these games and I wonder how the hell the years have passed us by so quickly. We are even going back to films that released in the 1960s in today's video, with some of the most iconic British actors starring in them, although mainly though the 1980s and 1990s are here to take domination, as these two decades in particular are fairly famous for producing some of the best films ever created. As per usual, rather than sticking with a couple of platforms to showcase these games, I have gone out my way once again to include many platforms from home computers to consoles and even portable gaming systems too. So then, without further hesitation, let's take a look back at another 10 of the best movie-to-game tie-ins.
Shaken, not stirred.
Certainly, Commander Bond.
The early 2000s was a superb time to be a James Bond fan. In 2001, Agent Under Fire released a first-person shoot-'em-up game. 2002 brought us another game similar with Nightfire. 2004 brought us an absolutely spectacular Everything or Nothing, which was a third-person shooter. And finally in 2005, From Russia With Love came along. I find it strange to date why this particular Sean Connery 1963 Bond film was remade into a game, where you had much more recent Bond films to do it with. Nevertheless, From Russia With Love by EA Games is a truly spectacular game, and even if Connery's original film from 1963 lacked an explosive action compared with the later Bond films, then this game, which released on GameCube, Xbox, PlayStation 2 and PSP, added extra different parts deviating from the source material to make it full-blown action-packed, as well as even adding parts from other older Bond films such as the Jetpack, which was from Thunderball, and of course the Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger. The game comprises of 14 main stages, which are all fairly big too. To make this even better, there was actually 4 unlockable stages in addition to these 14 stages. In true James Bond gaming style, we of course have a plethora of tasks to do in each mission. Although these are all fairly basic and nothing over the top complex, the main focus here is really all about the third person action, and this is where the game really succeeds. If you love the style of Everything or Nothing and how it controlled, well, instead of having a Pierce Brosnan style James Bond, then this game is more the same, but only with a Sean Connery, with an impersonator giving us that iconic Scottish Bond accent.
Oh, Moneypenny, let me tell you the secret of the world.
As the game progresses, we get a lot of cutscenes, and surprisingly, considering this game is at this point just over 20 years old, this game totally holds up today through visuals. Although obviously for a better visual experience, the PlayStation 2 or original Xbox probably excelled graphically over this GameCube version. If you like the idea of driving sections, again, just like the previous EA Bond game, this release also has that too, as well as having access to swap equipment on the fly and change weapons. This style of targeting enemies is a great way too. Just hold down a button and Bond auto targets, whilst pressing another button will shoot at the target. The game opens up amazingly, and the jetpack section as we fly around Big Ben in London is crazy as we shoot down an enemy helicopter. The aim of the game is to defeat Octopus, a terrorist organisation, although EA could not get the rights to call the baddest Spectre, or even include the main villain from the film due to copyright issues. So we get Octopus instead, clearly a nod to Roger Moore's Octopussy. All in all, this is a superb third-person shooter. Let's just hope the new Project 007 game releasing soon can match the greatness of these old classics. Although the 1994 film A Double Dragon is widely criticised and always has been criticised for its pure cheesiness, I rented this on VHS from my local video shop when it started running at the cinema. You know, that old way of life that people once had. The cinema release first, and then waiting a few months for the VHS to arrive on retail or rental. I watched it and actually enjoyed it back in the day, and I'll be honest, I haven't watched it since. It's one of those films that through its unpopularity, it was very difficult to find a copy of it to keep. But nevertheless, I did enjoy it, and of course, like most kids of this era, Double Dragon was one of the best side-scrolling beat-em-ups around. It was all happening whilst Jackie Chan was also in the background releasing some of his best works from the 80s and into the era of the 90s too. Yes, to say I wasn't interested in beat-em-up games and martial art films would be a clear lie. So, as for the Double Dragon game, it's of course a one-on-one beat-em-up game and released in 1995 by SNK, with the original Double Dragon developers being Technos Japan, crafting their magic for this game. The game is best known on the Neo Geo, although the Neo Geo CD and the PlayStation also had a version of it. The first release of the game was actually for the Neo Geo AES and MVS. Now of course this game had some criticism in its day. I mean, by 1995, the world had already seen some of the best of this style with Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, and of course Double Dragon 5 The Shadow Falls released a year prior to this, which was the first Double Dragon game to feature the one-on-one format rather than the traditional side-scrolling beat-em-up style. But personally, I wasn't a big fan of The Shadow Falls and preferred this game. Sure, it's nothing particularly groundbreaking by any means, but for one-on-one beat-em-up fans who enjoy seeing alternative versions of Billy and Jimmy and even a Bobo, then this game is fairly good with some surprisingly tight controls. It's definitely a looker of a game too, featuring some really nice backdrops and sprite animations. We of course get many characters in the game from the film, which are, to be fair, forgettable characters, but nevertheless it is here if that's your thing. Besides basic attack moves for each player, which consists of heavy attacks and light attacks, whenever we are attacked our charge meter fills up. Once we have a flashing charge sign, we can unleash the special attack, which are all different for each character. I think this game was a little underlooked in the day, and like I said, with the Shadow Falls already meeting with a bad reception on release a year prior to this game, I think some might have avoided this game, and many would argue that Double Dragon should actually remain as a side-scrolling game only. A little like the whole Sonic the Hedgehog 2D versus 3D argument. Now, this isn't the first time that I have mentioned Michael Jackson's Moonwalker in my videos. The US scored computer versions were absolutely terrible. The C64, Amstrad CPC and ZX Spectrum games for example, and I actually put these in the worst movie the game tie-ins video. However, Moonwalker also had a different version for both Sega Mega Drive and the Sega Master System. Of course, these are nowhere near as wonderful as the arcades game, which of course was a completely different game altogether and followed an isometric style shoot 'em up style, but nevertheless these two Sega releases of Moonwalker have always gone down as a little bit of a classic for many people. Sure, it's repetitive, but isn't most games? The Mega Drive release is pretty much the same as what the Sega Master System received, although the Sega Mega Drive game obviously features far superior visuals and huge audio upgrades too. So, the levels in this 1991 release are roughly set around the film with the same name, although there are a couple of strange levels such as the graveyard, which to my knowledge wasn't actually in the Moonwalker film. But hey, it's Michael Jackson, so let's just throw in a thriller themed stage too. In each stage, our aim is to rescue one of Michael's friends from the film. These girls could be hiding anywhere, behind doors, behind bushes. If you think you can open it, as each level has a quota of kids to rescue. Once we have found all of our friends, Bubbles come along and guides us to where we need to go next to take on a boss. The game pretty much goes 3 levels per stage, which are all themed on something. For example, the first stage, which comprises of 3 levels, is from the most iconic from Moonwalker, which is of course Club 30. Once we make it past all 3 levels with defeating bosses, we then move on to the next stage. We have a basic attack where Michael can kick with magical little sparkles appearing, which looks pretty cool, and the sprite animation for the movements of Michael Jackson looks pretty cool here, admittedly, especially when walking upstairs. We also have a special attack move where Michael throws his cap, which makes enemies explode. Or for the ultimate awesomeness, we can press down on the special attack button for a few seconds to watch all enemies on screen dance with Michael. I played this game endlessly as a kid and loved it. Not only does it feature some very cool backing music, which ranges from Smooth Criminal, Beat It, The Way You Make Me Feel. Like I said, this game is truly great fun, although admittedly repetitive. Many will question why the arcade game never made it to the Sega Mega Drive at least, and that question remains strange to date for many. However, the very next best thing to the arcade game was likely these 2 Sega games. Just forget about the shoddy US Gold computer versions, those were utter trash. Data East and US Gold released the 8-bit computer versions of the Goonies in 1985 in time for the launch of the film of the same year. The popular computers at the time each had a version of the game, the C64, ZX Spectrum and Atari 8-bit to name a few. However, another version released in Japan in 1986 for the Famicom, in which Konami did the honours, as well as releasing the same game on other Japanese platforms at the time, such as the Sharp X1 and PC 8801. To say the 1986 version of the Goonies was a Japanese exclusive though wouldn't actually strictly be true. Shortly after, Nintendo ported the game over for the North American audience with its arcade Versus system, although this port was actually known as Versus the Goonies, but nevertheless it was pretty much the same game using the same hardware as the Famicom. Shortly after, and confusingly, the west of the world are likely more familiar with the Goonies 2 for the NES, which is understandably confusing. I mean, as much as fans of the original film have begged for a sequel over the years, it has never actually happened, but a sequel for the first game emerged in 1987 and 1988, which Konami also produced. Now, because in the world of films the Goonies Part 2 doesn't actually exist, we'll stay on track with the theme of this video. What you see here is the original Japanese Famicom game, which was based on the original film. Now, personally and most strikingly is the amazing chiptune track of Cyndi Lauper's The Goonies Are Good Enough. I mean, this game is worth booting up just for that alone. It's just so nostalgic, and personally being a Cyndi Lauper fan of the 80s era in particular, a chiptune of this track is definitely welcome here. It sounds awesome. Secondly, is the phenomenal gameplay. Sure, it looks his age, but that's not to say that this Famicom game isn't still a great scrolling platformer to date, because it truly is. We play the game as an unnamed character, which is strange, but it's early days of Nintendo after all, and anything was possible. The aim is to navigate through the various caves where we need to collect bombs, which we can carry one at a time, and then use them to blow up doors, which will at times provide the player with a key. After collecting 3 keys, we can then open up locked sections, which furthers us into the game. We get a basic attack move to hit bats, rats, and a randomly reoccurring blue-suited sprite who is actually a Fratelli. Strangely enough, I don't recall any of the Fratellis in the film dressed in a bright blue suit, but hey ho, these are all out to deplete your health bar. But by collecting 8 diamonds which randomly appear in places, this will fill our health bar once again. The aim of the game follows the structure of the film, in which we need to find our way to the pirate ship. This is a seriously great game and definitely worth checking out if you've not done so already. If you're enjoying the content today, please like and subscribe, and also remember to hit that notifications bell and select all so you don't miss upcoming content. This channel also has a wealth of emulation tutorials, including standalone and front-end guides. Just Jamie is your ultimate go-to channel for everything retro related. Anyways, for now, on with the video. I was never particularly a fan of the Dan Aykroyd and James Belushi 1980s Blues Brothers film, which was strangely written and directed by John Landis, the man behind one of my favourite horror films, An American Werewolf in London. But the game, which released on multiple platforms in 1991 by Titus France, were actually pretty good platformers, which are often very much overlooked when people talk about retro 2D platforming games. Personally, I prefer the Commodore Amiga version of this game, although as a kid I did play the C64 version, which actually was a demo from the Commodore Format Power Pack cassette tape. It also released for the Nintendo Game Boy and the NES, to name just a couple. The Blues Brothers also received fairly positive reviews in its day, especially the Amiga and Commodore 64 versions, so much so that a lesser known sequel released for it in 1993, which went by the name of the Blues Brothers Jukebox Adventure, although the original game which you see here is the far superior version. This is one of those rare platformers from this era where we can actually play two players simultaneously, although this admittedly turns into something like Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on the Sega Mega Drive, as the screen will only focus on player 1, and so if player 2 is behind, this can get a little annoying admittedly. However, the gameplay itself, like I said, it's a decent game. The aim of it is to collect particular items within its 6 fairly large scrolling stages, whilst avoiding the police in the process. There's lots of collectibles in the game where the obvious Super Mario coins have been replaced by records. You can even select to play as either Jake or Elwood, although both characters pretty much play the same as each other. And if you were a fan of the film, then you can play the game with style. Some of the music from the film itself has been made into 8-bit and 16-bit versions, and they sound pretty cool too. We can walk into doors to discover hidden areas and to ultimately find the items needed to pass levels. We can also pick up boxes to throw at enemies in the game. All in all, yeah, definitely check out the Blues Brothers, especially the computer versions, which were rated much more highly than the console versions. It's a colourful, fun and fairly well executed platforming game from the early 90s that deserves much more attention than what it actually gets. I previously covered the Nintendo Entertainment System's version of Gremlins 2, the new batch, in the first part of this series, and praised it highly, because to be fair, it really was a great game, although very hard too. I also mentioned that there was a completely different version for the Nintendo Game Boy, which was a side-scrolling platformer, and this is it. This is what Sunsoft released in 1990 to go alongside the film, and what we have here is a very good and very addictive game where we control Gizmo, and I ain't talking about one of my guinea pigs either. We control Gizmo, the Mogwai version. The game comprises of 4 main stages, which are all themed around film sets, which is partially what the film is about. Although the gameplay is very different to the NES version, Sunsoft pretty much use the same boss sprite designs in this version too. Now, I would be clearly lying if I said that this game was a lot easier than the NES version. They are highly likely on par with each other in terms of equal difficulty levels. The trick with this Game Boy release is to explore. By exploring stages rather than rushing through the game, you will find weapons to use against the bats and gremlins and so forth. In fact, this is a crucial part of this game. It is very unlikely that you will get very far without a weapon. We also find toolboxes, which gives us invincibility for a short while, although if you fall or walk over spikes whilst this is happening, the invincibility disappears and that funky 8-bit tune will disappear and be replaced with the normal stage music. In addition to the superb gameplay, we also have a fairly nicely designed opening to the game, which tells us what the game is about. It is very different from the storyline of the film, but we do get to see Billy and how Gizmo defies his rules, Hence why Gizmo creates 4 gremlins, which we take on as bosses in this game. All in all, Gremlins 2 The New Batch for me is one of those games I played back in the day, although probably not as much as the NES version. Let's not discredit this version though. It's a great 8-bit portable version of Gremlins 2 which has the true old school tough factor to it. That type of factor which makes you swear when the game beats you. Considering the PlayStation 2 had released around a year prior to the Italian job releasing for the original PlayStation as well as a version for Windows, this game, which released by Rockstar Games in North America and the sales curve for the European market, was a decent racing game based on the classic Michael Caine and Benny Hill 1969 film. It was praised in its day for being a very intuitive game in terms of handling the minis in other cars and navigating missions. One might argue that it was a simplified version of something like Driver. This version isn't to be confused with the 2003 game, which was based on the Mark Wahlberg Italian Job remake. This version is literally based on the original 1969 film. Strangely enough, the idea of turning it into a game didn't happen for over 30 years, and totally missed its opportunity in the 1980s at least. To say the film was too dated would be a lie. I mean, The Great Escape had computer games during the 80s for a range of home computers, and that film was even older than The Italian Job, which actually released in 1963. I mean, Jesus, this far back the Beatles were fairly new in the world of pop music. So going back to the game then, yes, this is absolutely worth a blast with, and what made it even more appealing is that on its original PlayStation release, it was actually priced around £20 to buy brand new, whereas most PlayStation games were around the £35 to £40 mark. The game sticks with the narrative of the 1960s film to the point where we even have cutscenes too, which has captured the iconic parts of the film. Sure, with today's standards they do admittedly look dated, but really in 2001, and considering the PS2 was a fairly new system at the time, this game still looked acceptable. The game starts with Michael Caine's character, Charlie, come out of prison and already breaking the law by driving in a knocked off motor. The game follows the film's storyline nicely, where we travel around London and Turin, mainly the same environments as we would see in the film itself. We can save our progress as we go along. The game is notably short compared to other games of this era, but it's not too short that you wouldn't need a memory card. As we finish each mission in the game, we have a cutscene which explains what the upcoming mission is based on and what we need to do.
Is on her way to pick me up from the prison gates. Touching scene, innit?
In addition to its main story mode, there are also other modes of play too, such as a multiplayer mode, a single player practice mode where we can actually gain points for achieving particular stunts, where we can use these stunts in the main storyline of the game. I think The Italian Job kind of missed a potential bigger audience in its day due to releasing slightly after PlayStation 2 came out, and of course the world at that point was looking at the original PlayStation as a dated platform back then. A real shame, but if you haven't played the game based on the 1969 Michael Caine classic, give this one a bash. Batman games are far from a stranger in my best movie to game tie-ins as well as my worst movie to game tie-ins videos. Largely, Batman films had terrible games such as the shocking Batman Forever or the godforsaken Batman and Robin, to name just a couple. But you do get a handful of them which are actually decent games. This is Batman the Movie, released by Ocean Software in 1989. The popular line of computers from this era, the Atari ST, the Commodore Amiga, the ZX Spectrum, to name just a few, all had a version of this game, whereas Nintendo and Sega had different versions by different publishers altogether. This is the Commodore 64 version of the game, and this is the version I grew up with, and I know it inside out pretty much. The aim of the game is to obviously defeat Jack Napier, aka the Joker, and rescue Vicky Vale. Batman's aka Bruce Wayne's love interest in the film. We have 5 levels in this version of the game, 2 platforming side-scrolling levels, one of which is the Axis chemical plant where we chase down Jack Napier and, like in the film, watch him fall into the vat of acid and for him to ultimately transform into the Joker. And the second platforming stage is the cathedral stage where we must chase down the Joker again and watch him fall. In between the platforming stages we have a baffling puzzle section which I must have fluked as a kid to get past it, and we also have a couple of racing stages where we control the Batmobile and another where we fly through Gotham City and cut the gas infested balloons like in the film. The 8-bit versions are different to that of the 16-bit versions where the simulation stages were different, but like I said, this is the version I grew up with and know best. The game follows the film fairly well for what it is and certainly highlights the main parts of it too, although a level for the museum part of the film could have been good here, but hey, these games were very small and only a small amount of data could be crammed onto a tape or even floppy disk. To take it even further, Ocean also produced a cartridge version of this too for the C64, although I did have the cassette version. If you are familiar with the genius of Jonathan Dunn, particularly in the C64 game world, then you will realise that the music he produced for this game is fairly incredible in places. What baffles me most with this Ocean game is that unlike a few other Ocean games I had as a kid, this game was actually possible to beat and complete rather than their C64's version of RoboCop. If you have watched my Worst Movie the Game tie-in series, you might have come across the Mega CD version of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It was an absolute mess of a game which reeked in FMV semi-catastrophe, where the game itself had so many bugs that it really shouldn't have been sold in the state that it was sold in. Bram Stoker's Dracula had a few different versions in game form. Some had a version for the more superior hardware such as the FPS style MS-DOS game, whereas the Nintendo Entertainment System, Game Boy, Sega Game Gear and the Master System each had a version of the game that I'm playing here. The Sega Master System likely had the very best version, believe it or not. Yes, I just said the Sega 8-bit console was better than the 16-bit versions. So, why is this? Well, I think it's due to the simplicity of it all really. Clearly, these 8-bit systems could not manage anything FMV based, and so the more basic approach was needed, and it worked really well too. Now, to narrow these 8-bit versions down, I personally think this version, like I say, the Master System version, which released in 1993, in which Probe developed it for Sony ImageSoft, handles and definitely looks the best of the bunch, although this could be debated against the NES version, but personally I would say this Master System game looks best with more colours used in the game. Of course this is a bog standard scrolling platforming game, but I surely don't think it gets enough love as a decent game in the genre. People will rave about the very awesome Addams Family games by Ocean, but I don't think this game is far behind it in terms of greatness. We have 3 different difficulty levels, in which if you choose to play easy or medium difficulty, you won't see all of the game. By playing on the hardest modes, then the entire game opens up for you. There are plenty of hidden rooms and fairly good level designs here, and possibly even one of the better looking Master System games, with some fairly pretty nice and intricate sprite detail. If you choose to play the game on the hardest mode, there is a total of 7 stages, each of which contains 2 levels, which are divided into day and night, making this game a whopping 14 levels in total. Many of the stages in the game are based around different castle interiors, but we do have some outside sections which are fairly nice looking for the hardware that is running on. We play as Keanu Reeves' character Jonathan from the 1993 film and have a basic attack move. We can jump relatively high, we can also duck in, collect special weapons such as axes and fire to throw at skeletons, bats and other nasties. If you're a veteran like myself of computers, the name Jerome Tell might spring to mind, the famous SID musician for various C64 games. He also programmed the music for this game, which is why the music, although not the best of his work, is a cut above your average Master System game. Even in their day, the 8-bit console and portable versions were rated higher by critics in comparison to the 16-bit versions of Dracula. Most definitely a case of simplicity and respecting the system's limits with what it could and could not achieve successfully. This was the game that made Nintendo jealous for its ridiculous amount of sales, in which Donkey Kong Country was born in order to compete with this Sega Mega Drive 1993 release. But for more info on that story, check out my Digitized Games video from a couple of weeks back. Since this is the 4th part with more to come in this series, people have surely wondered, where are all the Disney games based on films? Let's be fair, Disney did some awesome platformers in the 90s. This Aladdin game for sure, but others such as The Lion King, The Jungle Book, as well as all those others about a film such as Castle Illusion, they were all wonderful games. As for this game, you'll likely notice there is no music firstly. Damn copyright situation there. But if you haven't heard the music for this Mega Drive game, I assure you it's pretty damn awesome and very similar to the soundtrack of the 1992 Disney film itself, with of course the very awesome Robin Williams voicing Genie, a couple of years prior to him dressing up as a granny. So what makes Aladdin such a great game? Well, very simply, everything. This is just pure platform perfection, and this is why this game was so successful in its day, and so much so that it was actually ported to the Switch a couple of years back, with of course the Lion King bundled with it too. My wife-to-be is a huge Disney fan and urgently wanted to play this game when she found out about it. I would just say she experienced the high difficulty level of old games. Let's be honest, games like this are deceiving. They look extremely childlike with gorgeous backdrops and sprites, but at their core are extremely punishing games that even adults lose their shit over. Aladdin follows the film loosely, and we must rescue Jasmine. I won't go into the storyline, most of you watching this likely will have watched the film at this point. Level design is perfect, and controlling Aladdin is geniusly done here. It feels awesome, and Aladdin really controls well. I'll be the first to admit I'm not a Disney fan as such, but always enjoyed the Disney games, well, during the 8 and 16-bit eras at least. And that's it for another 10 best movie to game tie-ins until part 5 arrives at some point. I did mention in the introduction that there would be some games in today's video that many likely would have forgotten about, and hopefully it's reminded several people out there that really, considering the bad name film to game tie-ins have, is that really so? Anyways, like and subscribe if you like what you see today. I'll leave the link for the first 3 parts of this series in the comments section, which I uploaded as a trilogy a little while back. Drop a line in the comments as always, which game did you enjoy playing out of this video today? Anyways, until next time, stay retro.